Hey everyone, it's Evan Neufeld here. I have some exciting news to share with you today. For the first time in over 3 years, I'm opening up space to take on new clients for investment management. If you've been waiting for the right opportunity to get professional financial planning and investment advice, now is your chance. I currently work with around 100 households managing over $55 million in assets across BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. So if you live in any of those provinces, I'll be doing new client onboarding in June and July, and I'm looking to add a few more households to my client group. If you're thinking about leaving your local bank branch for more personalized and transparent financial planning and investment advice, I'd love to hear from you. My investing approach is low cost, globally diversified, and evidence-based, using factor-tilted index funds from Dimensional Fund Advisors. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, click on the link in the show notes below to join the waitlist by answering a few quick questions so I know a little bit more about your situation, and then you'll be able to see on that landing page the types of clients that are best suited for my area of expertise. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope to connect with some of you very soon. Thanks so much. Hello and welcome back to the Canadian Money Roadmap Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Neufeld. On today's episode, I'm diving into one of the biggest challenges facing pre-retirees, the surprising fact that almost no one has actually calculated their income need. Understanding your true income need is the critical first step in ensuring a comfortable and secure retirement. So in this episode, we'll break down the essential expenses you need to consider, those that will stay, those that will go away, and new ones that will show up. So by the end of this episode, you'll have a pretty clear roadmap to work backwards from your income needs to figure out exactly how you're going to meet them. When people think about retirement, they think about all the fun that they're going to have and the fact that they don't have to go to work anymore. But once you retire, you need to build your retirement paycheck from a variety of different sources, including your own savings. But because of differences in spending and taxation and all these different things, it's not as cut and dry as you might expect for how much you actually need to spend during your retirement years. Nearly everyone that I've ever worked with on a retirement plan doesn't actually have a good handle on how much they spend on a monthly basis, let alone some of the annual expenses they expect to have. So when I talk to people, you say, oh, do you have a pretty good handle on how much you spend every month? Oh yeah, absolutely. Don't go into any debt, pay off the credit card every month. And then when we start putting some numbers to it, you say, okay, well, how much do you need to spend every year? I actually have no clue. Okay, this is fine because this is a solvable problem, but it's a problem nonetheless. Right. And this isn't budgeting at this point. This is just figuring out where your money actually goes, because for most of you listening, by the time you get to retirement, you're so entrenched in what you spend and how you spend that changing the behavior part is actually really hard. So that's not the goal here, is to make anyone feel bad about how they spend. It's just to itemize and categorize and recognize before we can work backwards on how much you need to have saved on your own and from all of your other sources of income to meet that need. So let's get started with categorizing your regular expenses. I like to put these into 3 different categories. And before we get started here, if you want a tool to help you do this, I built one that you can download for free. You can do this yourself. You can do it on paper. You can do whatever you want, but it's free. You can head over to the link in the show notes and you can download my retirement spending calculator. And it'll just help you put everything in the right categories and do a little bit of math for you to give you an annualized number that you can use for your ongoing retirement planning. So the first part is categorizing your regular expenses. So let's look at the ones that are going to stay. So when you retire, there's going to be tons of things that you spend your money on that are going to stay. The big ones are going to be things like your utilities, cell phone, internet, heat, water, electricity, groceries, all those kind of stuff. Those things are probably going to continue in a largely similar way, whether you're working or not. So write all of those down and give some approximate figures for those. And in my spreadsheet that you can download, you can say whether it's a weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, annual expense, whatever, and you can just categorize it that way. But there are regular expenses that are going to go away. So things that are work-related specifically, that one maybe seems obvious, but things like commuting. So maybe your gas bill is going to be lower. Maybe your vehicle maintenance is going to be less. Maybe you use transit, so maybe you don't have to buy a transit pass anymore. Maybe things like that. Professional attire. So some people have to wear a certain type of clothing for their work. whether it's steel-toed boots or suit and tie, you probably aren't going to be buying those nearly as much once you're retired. So if you're going through your bank statements or your credit card statements and you're seeing all these different things, in my spreadsheet, you can say, okay, well, this stays or this goes away. And so some of these things you might put in there and you can just think about it for a minute or two and think, okay, am I actually going to have this expense again? Probably not. And then you can just categorize it accordingly. Things like your mortgage. So even though you still need to live in your house, your mortgage will hopefully be done by the time you retire. That's one thing I generally recommend. And you're not going to be saving for retirement anymore. So if you have a regular cash flow item of money that goes to, say, TFSAs or RSP investments, those might disappear or they might just look differently. And so you can categorize those appropriately as well. Oftentimes, kids are probably going to be out of the house at this point. So maybe your grocery bill is going to be a little bit lower. Maybe you're paying for some of their expenses, say, while they're in university or things like that. And you know your situation best. So you can take a look at what you're currently spending and what is realistic to assume might go away in that case. Now, the third section here for regular expenses are the expenses that are going to show up. These ones are going to be new that you haven't been spending money on before. So you're going to have to guess, and these can be tough to estimate, but you can do a little bit of research online for average amounts, or you could ask friends who have been in this situation already. Your friends and family can be good guinea pigs for you on this one, but write them down and make a best guess. On the spreadsheet, if you've downloaded it, this is on the third tab that says new spending. And these are where you're going to do some estimating, and you can just put those things in there of things that you anticipate. So these are going to be things maybe like healthcare costs. So maybe you have a health and dental plan that you buy out from your workplace benefits, but previously it might have been coming out of your paycheck or something like that. So you didn't actually see the outflow from your bank account. Whereas now you might have to pay the premiums to keep a plan like that going. Things like leisure activities. What are you going to spend your time on? If you actually had more time to spend on your own, you might spend that doing all sorts of activities that incur costs that you're not currently spending. So you can put those in there. And then maybe condo fees. So say you downsize. So maybe this is later on. Maybe it's not the day you retire or anything like that, but it might be good to think about. So say you're in a standalone house, but you want to downsize and you move to a condo. Well, there are different costs associated with that show up on a regular basis, even though you don't have a mortgage anymore. So those are your regular expenses. Now, the tougher one to often consider are your annual expenses. So if you're going through this exercise, maybe take the last 3 months of your bank account and kind of go through, and then you can use that a little bit to determine how much you're spending in each of these categories. And I would say actually look at your spending instead of guessing. It's like, well, I do $500 a month on groceries. It's like, well, no, it's actually $1,500 or whatever. When people guess, they often guess way lower than they actually are. So do a real accounting here. But if you're only doing a small sample size, which is realistic, honestly, you're not going to go back through 12 months of your spending here. If you're doing a smaller sample size there, the annual expenses are the things that you'll just spend 5-10 minutes thinking about and then go back and look to see what you actually spent. So the annual expenses that are going to stay are probably going to be property taxes if you own your property outright, insurance premiums of all sorts, and then ones that really sneak up on people are birthday and holiday gifts, anniversaries, all those kind of things. If you got grandkids in the mix, then all these things start to add up. And so it might be $25 here, $50 there, whatever, but over the course of a year, these could be thousands and thousands of dollars, and perhaps they're growing. Again, if you have grandkids and the number of people that you're buying Christmas gifts for keeps expanding every year, yeah, this is an expense that is probably worth planning for. Now, you also have annual expenses that will probably go away. So things like your loans. So if you have a mortgage that we talked about, I recommend that people paying off their vehicle loans or anything like that prior to retirement. That might be monthly or depending on how you pay it. Children's education fees. So you might be paying for tuition that shows up every September or something like that. That might all disappear. So there are probably fewer of the annual expenses that go away, but then there's going to be fun ones that show up. The big ones are probably going to be travel and hobbies. So a lot of clients that I work with, they now like to do 1 or 2 warm weather vacations in the cold weather months. And you can do a best guess. Maybe that costs you $5,000 each time. Maybe it costs you $10,000 each time, whatever. Put it in the spreadsheet so you can add it up and estimate accordingly. Things like hobbies. So like if you're trying to fill your time with new activities and things like that, you might end up paying for a membership or lessons or subscriptions to things that you haven't done before just because you didn't have the time. And now that you do, you've got all these additional costs that you might want to consider. A third one of annual expenses that shows up, it's not really an expense in the traditional way, but it's a cash flow item, would be charitable gifts. I have a number of retired clients that now like to give charitably, perhaps on an annual basis as lump sums. Many of them do smaller contributions throughout the year, but then say middle of the year or at the end of the year, they like to find the charities that they want to support and write them a bigger check at one time throughout the year. So if this is part of your life, that would be worth planning for as well, so that you can be sure that all of your priorities of fun and leisure, but also generosity, are being considered in the financial part of your retirement plan. Cool. So now that you've done all of this, again, in my spreadsheet, the math will end up being done for you. So all the things get added up, and then back on the first page, it'll kind of give you this big number, this annual number. So this is a best guess. This isn't written in stone or anything like that, but it's probably a lot closer than 99% of people are doing prior to their retirement. Now, once you have that number, this is what you can take to work backwards. So now that your retirement paycheck needs to be built from a combination of things like old age security, Canada pension plan, maybe workplace pension, maybe RSPs, TFSAs, maybe rental income, all these different things that are specific to you and your life. The big one that people are unsure of is how much they need invested in RSPs, TFSAs, non-registered accounts, whatever, to be able to turn that into income afterwards. And we can only do that if we know exactly how much you need to spend every year, and then how much you can get from all of your other sources of income. So what we did today here is figuring out how much you actually need to spend. This is the critical first step in the financial aspect of building your retirement plan. Once you've done this, the other parts get a little bit easier in some ways, but figuring out how much you need to spend is the $1 million question, right? If you're spending $25,000 a year versus $125,000 a year, boy, your retirement savings need to be very, very different amounts. Okay. So again, if you want help with calculating this, I would recommend you download my spreadsheet. Again, it's free. I'll just have a link in the show notes there. It'll just put in your email and it will send it off to you, and you can mess around with it if you want, or you can build it yourself. You can do it on paper. You can do whatever you want. But I highly recommend that if you are considering retirement in the next 5 to 10 years, or considerably less, maybe next week, spend some time figuring out how much you actually need to spend. And then from there, you can work backwards to figure out how much you need to come up with from all your different sources of income put together. Short episode today, but hopefully it was valuable for you. Let me know. Shoot me a text or an email. My contact info is always in the show notes, along with the opportunity to send in comments or questions via text message. Thanks so much for listening to this episode, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Canadian Money Roadmap Podcast. Any rates of return or investments discussed are historical or hypothetical and are intended to be used for educational purposes only. You should always consult with your financial, legal, and tax advisors before making changes to your financial plan. Evan Neufeld is a certified financial planner and registered investment fund advisor. Mutual funds and ETFs are provided by Sterling Mutuals, Inc.